Hi everyone, welcome back to this part 3 of my TDR2 build. In this section I'll be handling the tail boom assembly and also the tail rotor assembly and installing the whole thing into the heli. And then I just went a little bit further and also installed my main rotor head, but I'll show you that at the end. So the first thing they show you here is how to mount this tail pushrod guide inside the tail boom. This isn't necessary because when the tail boom comes with the kit, it's already installed on the inside, so there's actually nothing for you to do here. Here we're going to build the pushrod. So what Jan says is what you need to do first is take pliers and actually grip this bolt on the side that will be going into the pushrod. So you grip onto it and you screw this ball link in once and you screw it out. And the reason for that is these ball links are extremely tight on these threads. So if you first glue them and then screw it on for the first time, there's a chance that you could actually break that glue bond on the inside. Now Jan mentions that you should CA or use CA glue to actually fix this bolt inside the pushrod. I don't believe in CA anymore. I've mentioned before that I've lost an 800 machine due to using CA in this exact same position. So I will never use CA again. I only use epoxy. And what I've actually done is I've taken this bolt and pulled it out a little bit further, and I've taken masking tape and I covered exactly 11 millimeters with masking tape so that I couldn't get any epoxy on that section. Then what I did was I took a sharp knife and I cut tiny little ridges into this pushrod all the way around, not very deep, basically just scratching the surface, and I also took very rough sandpaper and I roughened up this area. And then I took epoxy and I put it around this bolt and I pushed it into the pushrod, and I left about a 2 millimeter spacing there. And then I took thread and I actually started wrapping it around the boom, around the pushrod and around this bolt. And then I put a layer of epoxy on there. And then I kept on wrapping the thread around, and I put a layer of epoxy and I wrapped it back again and I put a layer of epoxy. And I did that about 4 or 5 times. And in my mind, that whole thing will stiffen up. The thread actually went into the grooves of this bolt. It also sinks into those little ridges that I've made, and the epoxy hardens over the whole thing. So hopefully I've created a pretty strong bond between that bolt and the pushrod. So just give me a second. I just want to get my heli quick, and I want to show you guys what that pushrod joint actually looks like now. So hopefully you can see there that it's quite a thick bond, and that section at the front is where the thread actually runs over onto the bolt. So yes, definitely one of the strongest bonds I've made on my tail pushrod, and touch wood, I don't think this is going to come loose, hopefully, anytime soon. Okay, so the next part is then installing these foils on the tail. This was the first thing I've actually done on this heli build, because when I got the kit I literally just had to do something, but I handled this in part 1. Just for a quick summary, you measure 220 millimeters in, you put a piece of masking tape 23 millimeters up, you put a piece of masking tape, and you then take that foil and you align it with those pieces of masking tape, you lay it down and you pull it off and you have your letters. I've done mine in under 5 minutes, so it's pretty quick and easy. Yeah, just follow the instructions and you should get it perfectly straight on the tail boom. The next part is installing these foils on the top. These ones you have to wet in a little bit of soapy water. This is quite a nice practice run because it's really hard to mess this up. It's quite easy to do this, but it gives you a lot of practice to work with these foils before you start working on your main canopy. Just starting from the rear, you measure 15 millimeters, you put one of these foils, measure 35, put another foil, and when they're on the boom with the soapy water, they slip around and you can actually quite nicely align them. Jan has made little markings on them, which is the center point, and you just align that with the top of the tail boom. So very easy to do this. If we move on to the tail rotor, now we're installing the belt in this little hub. this belt, Jan just warns, don't bend it sharply in any place because there's fibers running along the length of this belt, and you don't want to damage those because then it weakens the belt in that position where it was bent sharply. So yeah, pretty standard, just push in the shaft from the side, let that whole thing seat. And now we're going to go to the support flanges. So you just hook these in. Jan supplies you 2 pieces of cardboard, which actually just holds those 2 flanges in position whilst you're installing this bolt. Now, this bolt of mine that was installed, when my pitch slider with its bell crank was installed, it actually bottomed out against this little end of the bolt, which protruded ever so slightly beyond that nut, and it would strike against it before it actually completely uses up the travel it has on the shaft. My solution eventually was, another pilot told me, just swap this bolt around, pretty clever, then this head is a lot smaller than that one and there's no real change. So my bolt actually comes in from this side and this nut sits on this side. Just something to watch out for. This is pre-assembled, so nothing much to do here. This is your tail rotor blade grips, pretty standard bearings, thrust bearing, not much I can say here. The only thing is that when mine was done, when I was done building it, I could actually move those blade grips in and out a little bit. And I thought I'm going to shim it up, so I opened it up, put a little shim in, closed it back up. But then what happened was this blade grip, actually, there is a flange over here. And it actually went and seated itself onto the flange, and then the blade grip couldn't move. So I took it apart again, removed the shim, and I left it as is. Jan actually mentions that there will be a bit of play under the speed that those blade grips will spin out, so it won't matter. I just thought it was a lot of play, but I ended up not doing anything to it, so something to look out for. Don't shim this up, because then these blade grips will actually seat themselves onto that flange over there and they won't be able to move. Here Jan just shows that the TDR2's tail rotor spins clockwise, whereas most other helis spin anti-clockwise. He says that the reasoning firstly is that if it spins clockwise and it strikes a little rock or something, it actually kicks it out to the back and not up into the main blades. The other companies say, yeah, it spins in reverse because of the downwash out of the main blades. The tail rotor actually has better grip. But that would then mean, if the heli is upside down, that the tail rotor isn't in that downwash anymore because it's going to the top of the heli, which is now down. That you would actually feel a difference in your tail if you were the right way up or inverted, which isn't true in my experience at least. So Jan also says that it's negligible, the difference that having it spin back into back up into the downwash, the effect that it has is negligible. So his spins to the front, kicks out stuff, and then he has a second advantage, which he says is going to remain a secret. Personally, I'm not an expert on aircraft aerodynamics and stuff, but I think it is when the heli does a speed run, which is what it's built for, the downwash out of the main blades would have a tendency to flow down and towards the back of the heli. So if these blade grips were spinning in reverse, they would actually kick up into that wind. Whereas now they're spinning forward, so they actually assist that air flowing out backwards. So I think this has to do with the aerodynamics when you're doing a speed run, but again, I am no expert. So this comes pre-assembled. This is the bell crank. This is the specific section that I was talking about earlier. If that bolt and nut is installed the way that it says in the manual over here, then this arm over here would actually bump against that bolt's edge on the other side. And if you swap it around and this head sits on this side, there's more than ample space between that and this head. So anyways, you just install this little bolt into that plastic sleeve, you install that bolt stud and Loctite it, and that's all you do on this. Over here we're mounting the tail fins. just check that these two little metal plates has a concave edge on the one side and they're flat on the outside. So the flat side goes against the actual tail fin and the concave edge sits against this concave of the tail boom. There you're just mounting that bell crank support to the tail fin. If you don't tighten this up, this little bell crank support can actually move, and as it moves up and down on this plane, which means this little plastic sleeve, that sleeve over there, and the ball it's seated on this pitch slider, it goes down and up around that ball, so you have to get that depth perfect. If you have it too far out and you move the tail pitch slider, there's a chance that this pitch ball might actually pull out of that sleeve. So just check that it is deep enough in there, but it's not too deep, because otherwise it will be very stiff to move this. But it's quite easy. You just loosen that bolt ever so slightly. You move your tail pitch slider and you twist that a little bit until you get it in the perfect position. Then you tighten this nut. And then Jan says you put a little bit of CA, which will, with a capillary effect, run inside, and it will actually glue that to your tail fin, and you'll have the perfect position for that bell crank support. Now you just install this little rubber ball at the bottom, and then we get to the tail boom. Jan says that you should put little rubber bands. He gives you 5 of these. So what happens when you close up the canopy, it sits tightly against the tail boom, and you push one of those rubber bands over. And after some use, obviously this rubber will deteriorate and it will break off, but he's given you 5, then you just slide the next one back and you start using it until all of them are finished, at which point you'll just buy some new rubber bands and put them around there. They're actually bicycle tubes, inner tubes, so they're pretty cheap. It is mentioned somewhere as well, at the exact position where your canopy closes around your tail boom, you should take some black electrical tape and wrap it around once. That stops your canopy from actually scratching your tail boom. Not that it would do any damage, it just won't look nice, but a piece of electric tape would solve that. Jan says don't use one of these rubber bands because they're too thick. You literally just need a very thin cover around your tail boom to stop the scratching from happening. Okay, so now comes the installation of the tail boom into the main body. You take out these bolts over here. This is your skid mounts at the bottom. You loosen that bolt on this side and on the other side just ever so slightly, and then that thing will tilt out. Once that is tilted out, you have access to this belt pulley over here. You then take your tail boom, you check the direction of the belt, and you twist the belt 90 degrees, at which point it will now match up with the tail, with the belt pulley over here, and then Jan shows you exactly how you run the belt through and back into the tail boom. The one thing I want to mention at this point, you can see here that are these boom clamps, which the bottom part is actually the skid mount. The boom at this stage protrudes inside the heli's body. Once you've pulled that tail boom out to stiffen up the belt, mine actually sits perfectly flush with this boom clamp. So just something to look at. Make sure you pull it out enough that this tail boom sits flush with this boom clamp. It gets very tight, so it takes a bit of energy, but yeah, I've seen another guy post as well that he has this bolt which comes in from the other end that holds your redirection arm. He bought a bolt that's a little bit longer, and he's got a piece of metal, I don't exactly remember where he got it, but it's perfectly square. So it screws, that screw will go into it and will actually hold it in place, which means the tail boom can't slip back in if anything happens. But yeah, mine sits flush, I don't think it's a problem. So just a tip you can use if you want to. So here Jan just shows you where the belt must run with this tension on. So just have a look at that it's correctly installed. And then here he shows you how you pull out the tail boom, put tension on it, and then you tighten these 4 bolts to clamp onto the tail boom. Now we put in the actual tensioner. You clip it in there, you clip it in on that side, and then you screw this out. He says about 6 millimeters, at which stage this bolt of this tensioner arm will actually be more or less in the middle of your heli. The other thing that would mean the ideal tension. The other thing you can also have a look at is the belt runs across here and then down here and into the tail boom. So this section from here to here should be parallel to your main frame, at which stage you've also got the ideal belt tension. Alright, so that's it for the tail boom assembly. I've gone ahead and I've also installed my rotor head. The only thing I can mention here is that this swash blade fork, or swash dog as I've heard it called, it has that little pin which needs to align with your main rotor. On the other side of it is a little bolt, that set screw that you tighten it to the main shaft. Now here they say that you need to tighten that grub screw tight, but there's no mention of Loctite. So I just want to mention that I have put Loctite on mine. So if you lift up this black fork on the other side, the grub screw sits underneath it. So just something to note, I put Loctite on mine because you don't want that thing to come loose in flight. And then over here you just clip in these arms onto the balls, and he shows you how to use this white tool, which is also included in the kit. And then the last step I've done was I've adjusted this dampeners. He says 7 steps for the maiden flight would be perfect. So you just go put the pin in and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then that should be the perfect amount of dampening. And then he explains to you what effect you'll have if the dampening is too loose. If the dampening is too loose, you have the possibility of a boom strike. So what he says, you will notice the heli will sway underneath the main blade, so it'll look like it's loose underneath the main blades. That means your dampening is too soft. If it's too hard, you will notice huge vibrations on spool up. So if your heli has massive vibrations during the spool up, then the dampening is too hard, then you should soften it up a bit. Alright, so that's where I'm at the moment. Still enjoying this build. I've got all of my parts. I finally got my motor, actually just today bought it. So now it's just a matter of assembling the battery tray, installing the motor, the ESC, and going through the rest of the setup. So that will be my last video that I'll do on the TDR2 build, and I'll let you guys know if I pick up anything. Hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, see you then, cheers.